In the year 2004, 13 years ago from the time of recording, I was asked to chair a panel discussion in Tokyo within the context of the Tokyo Filmex Festival. And it was a discussion between Japanese filmmakers. The filmmakers on the panel were Kitano Takeshi, Tsukamoto Shinya, and Kore-eda Hirokazu. I'm not quite sure why a foreigner, a gaijin, was asked to chair this panel, but maybe there was some thinking that a foreign perspective might elicit something different from these luminaries of Japanese cinema, particularly these three independent-minded gentlemen. I had assumed in my naivety that a lot of the discussion during the session would take place between the panelists, that they would bat ideas around and bounce off each other to some degree. That showed, you can tell that this was my first time to chair such a session in Tokyo, because that's not how it works. All three of them stared fixedly ahead, ignoring each other completely, and there was absolutely no banter or interchange of any kind within the panel. So it fell to me to keep it going by asking each of them serially questions, giving them something to say. As if I hadn't done that, it would have dried up into silence and we would have had to abandon the session. So once this dawned on me, it became quite a strain chairing this panel. And I was dredging my mind to come up with suitable questions to ask these guys, to get them to say something, just to keep the audience entertained and keep the whole thing on the rails. So one of my questions to Kore-eda, who at that time was known primarily for what I think we'd have to call art house films. He had made Maboroshi, his first feature. This is after a background in making documentaries for television, which he continued doing for a little while after the first feature, but broadly speaking, the bulk of his documentary career was before he turned to feature films. But he'd made the first feature, Maboroshi, based on a very successful novel of the time, and it's a very austere, difficult piece about loss, tragedy, the emotional weight of losing a loved one, the effect on children, this kind of thing. He'd followed it with a film that was a big popular hit in Western art house circles, a film called, in English it's called Afterlife. In Japan it was called Wonderful Life, but calling it Wonderful Life was not enough to make it a hit in Japan, where it had at best a niche success. And he followed that in turn with a third feature called Distance, which is a reflection on the Aum Shinrikyo gas attack, the sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. The film is about surviving relatives of cult members who have been engaged in something very much like the Aum Shinrikyo gas attack. And in particular, there's a focus on one young man who we discover at the very end of the film is in fact the son of the leader of the cult, and who is the one most devastated of all by what his father, his late father, has led the others to do. Now these were modest successes in Japan. They were critical successes in Japan, but they were at best art house hits in terms of box office in Japan. Insofar as they had purchase in the West, they were entirely in art house circles, although Afterlife did succeed. It became one of the more popular art house titles of the year in many Western countries, because it was an easy film to enjoy and like. But in Japan, he certainly hadn't become very big and successful, and he had been very loyal to the TV station, or the TV company rather, that had supported his documentary making. It's a company called TV Man Union, and although TV Man Union had no history or tradition of producing feature films, he had made a point of drawing them into co-production on all of his features. So the TV Man Union would, insofar as there was any profit to be made, some of it would go to TV Man Union. It was Kore-eda's very decent way of thanking people who had supported him and given him his first break as a TV documentary director. So that's where Kore-eda is at this point. Back to this panel discussion in Tokyo in 2004. One of the questions I asked Kore-eda to try and just keep the thing going in my desperate attempts to keep some momentum going in the panel was, you've become known for a certain kind of film, and I know it's not always easy financially. Do you plan to continue making the same kind of film? This was a question expecting the answer yes. The answer I got was no. I think I've come to a turning point now. I think I want to make a more popular kind of film. I'm going to change my filmmaking practice and try to aim for something altogether more appealing to a larger audience. By that I think he meant in Japan, because he was very conscious of not doing that well in the Japanese market and feeling the need to expand his Japanese audience. For him, I think the foreign interest had by that stage become a bit secondary. I mean, he was used to it. There were always sales to foreign distributors, but they were not big money sales, and the films didn't make big money in Western countries because they were released as art house titles, and art house titles almost never make significant money in Western distribution. So I took this to mean that he was looking to make something a bit more popular and possibly populist in Japan. But I was very surprised to hear him say it, because I thought of him very much as an art house director with very austere manners. At the very early years, he had always been dedicated to controlling everything. He was a real control freak, in fact, to the extent that when he travelled on to festivals abroad, he took his own translator with him to make sure that every word he uttered was faithfully translated. He wouldn't have to rely on local translators at any point. So he was pretty much unique in that respect. I can't think of any other director who's ever done that I can recall. So he was very much a control freak, and you could see it in the films as well, which were controlled to the nth degree. So I wasn't expecting to hear him say, I'm going to try and turn more popular. But he was, if ever a filmmaker was true to his word, it was Kore-eda on that occasion, because from that point onwards, about 2004 onwards, around the time of Nobody Knows, the film about abandoned kids coping for themselves in an apartment when their mother is in another town, he did indeed start to make a more popular kind of film, inevitably straying towards the territory of soap opera, because his subject perennially is the family. He's talking about family issues, family relationships, family jealousies, rivalries, the way that a parental generation has certain expectations for the next generation which may or may not be met, the way that the next generation may or may not rebel against the expectations of the parents' generation, how the grandparents fit in. Grandparents almost always, as in I Wish, played by Kirin Kiki, who is, you could say, an axiom of Japanese cinema. She's become a regular stock player in Kore-eda's films. And in I Wish, as in quite a few other films, she plays the grandmother figure who is irascible and eccentric to some degree and with a very marked personality of her own. I followed his progress in the last 10 or so years with some interest. And some surprise, because I didn't really think he was going to go in this direction, and I certainly didn't expect it personally. And it's been something of a surprise to me that Westerners haven't noticed the shift in his trajectory so much. People discuss the later films as if they were a very logical extension of the early films, whereas in fact they're very different. They're much looser. They're much more prone to cliche, I have to say. They do have a distinct soap opera characteristic to them. They treat family matters in much the same way that a soap opera does. A high-minded, serious, accomplished, achieved soap opera, but nonetheless soap opera. So the issues that are discussed in the films tend to be very much the kind of family issues that rise to the front in the soap operas for television. Now, in that context, I Wish, made 2012, 2011, was, I think, in a way, the last of his films that is in a direct line from the early ones. It seems to me that in the later films, which are adapted from manga or otherwise prone to certain soap opera cliches, I Wish keeps all that under control to a much greater extent than most of the other later films. And it tells a story, I think, of his own invention. And once again, as in much of his best work, it's focused on children. In this case, two young brothers, a 12-year-old Koichi and his younger brother Ryu, short for Ryunosuke, who have gone separate ways because the family has broken up. We discover as the film goes on that this is because the father is a kind of feckless type. He's working as a labourer, but he has aspirations to be some kind of rock musician. And he has exactly the same insecurities in his career that most rock musicians have. And he is now living in Fukuoka, in the north part of Kyushu, which is the big western island of Japan. The elder brother, Koichi, has stayed with his mother, and they have moved to her parents' place, which is in Kagoshima, at the southern end of Kyushu. Kagoshima, the town, is notable for no doubt for many reasons, but one of its most striking feature is the fact that there is a semi-active volcano next to it. This is Sakurajima, which rumbles constantly. In fact, the film, as you will see, the film begins with Sakurajima rumbling and the kid doing his own drawings about ash settling on the town. Every day, in fact, you have to clean apartments in Kagoshima because there has been a new patina of dust coming from emissions, the rumblings of the volcano next door, which sends a certain amount of dust and debris up into the air, and of course it settles on everybody's possessions in everybody's apartments in the adjacent town. So you have two brothers separated, staying each with one parent at either end of Kyushu, the north end and the south end of Kyushu, pretty much. And so that's the first trigger for the story of the film. Kore-eda imagines a broken family. There may, I think, be autobiographical resonances in this for him, but it's not the first or last time that he dealt with such a broken family, and particularly on the effect of the separation of parents on the kids. In this case, the kids take it differently. Koichi is extremely anxious down south to be reunited. He wants the family to come back together again. He thinks only of good things about the family and just wishes it could be patched up. Ryu in the north, the kid brother, is much more ambivalent about this. He can only remember the bad things. He remembers the endless rows over dinner tables and stuff, and all the bad feeling, the acrimony, the unpleasantness domestically that had broken up the family in the first place. And he quite likes the new status quo. He likes the fact that he's up in Fukuoka. He likes having new friends. He likes growing vegetables in the back garden. There are all kinds of things about the new situation that he finds perfectly appealing. These two brothers stay in contact with each other by telephone call from school pretty much every day. So that's the family setup. But the other factors that Kore-eda plays into this situation to make the film are geographical and technological. Because at the time of the film's making, famously in Japan, the Shinkansen is opening a new line the length of Kyushu. Shinkansen, as many people will be aware, is Japan's high-speed rail network. It was one of the first in the world, actually, and it began in the early 1980s. And trains are very high-tech design, very streamlined in terms of the engine shapes and so on. And they ran at pretty high speeds across Japan, and they transformed domestic travel in Japan. Ever since they were introduced in the early 80s, the network has been expanding in Japan. But it's in the early 2010s that the Kyushu line finally opens, running from Hakata in the north down to Kagoshima in the south. This is true. This is a factually accurate background. So Kore-eda has come up with this divided family, living one half living at the bottom of Kyushu, the other half living at the top of Kyushu in Fukuoka, and he has noted that this family could be connected by the new Shinkansen trains, the new bullet trains, running up and down the island. So he has the elder brother, Koichi, in the south, come up with this idea that something magical might occur when the first two Shinkansen trains pass each other. This will take place at a place called Kawashiri, which is the exact midpoint of the line between the north and the south. And he takes it, and Koichi, who, as we noted, was the one who would like to reunite the family, persuades his younger brother on the phone to agree to rendezvous at Kawashiri on the day that the Shinkansen's first run, so that they can be present at that moment when the northbound and the southbound trains pass each other for the first time on this line. They've obviously checked the timetables, they know when it's going to happen. The younger brother, Ryu, somewhat reluctantly agrees to join in this plan. Both of them take friends along, so it's not just the two brothers. Koichi, the elder brother, succeeds in persuading the others that something magic will happen. A magical energy will be released at the moment that the two trains pass for the first time. And in that moment, they should wish silently or aloud for their dreams to become true. And his dream, he thinks, will be the reunification of the family. I don't need to spell out, spoilers a go-go to tell you what's going to happen in this film, but that is the basic setup. And the payoff of the film is what happens when the trains pass and when the kids are all waiting by the line to make their wishes. So I won't go into this because that would be the ultimate spoiler. It would rob the film of its point if you haven't seen it. But I would like to just point out that this is quite consonant with the early Kore-eda films. I think that this, the sensitivity to the experience of kids, which I think is very strong and very powerful in the film, superbly acted. The two brothers, by the way, are played by real-life brothers, the Maeda brothers, who are close in age to the characters they're playing, but they're sufficiently different to be believable as separated brothers living in different households for the last 6 months. The experience of the kids, the experience of the parents. In the case of the Kagoshima lot, which Koichi lives with, two higher generations, his mother and her parents, who are the ones who live in Kagoshima in the first place. In the case of Ryu, living with his father, played by Odagiri Joe, who is quite a familiar face, I think, in Japanese films these days. He's in lots and lots of things. Often playing a feckless type, as here, somebody who is not terribly reliable, basically a bit flaky, basically a bit prone to overindulgence in intoxicants of various kinds. Maybe he's typecast in this role, who knows? But anyway, Odagiri Joe has become known for playing this kind of thing. The obvious exception would be Suzuki Seijun's last film, the musical Princess Raccoon, in which he played the Juve lead, but more often he plays characters like the one he plays in I Wish, which is to say somebody who is not exactly an outlaw, but walking on the wild side. Now, the Japanese title of the film, Kiseki, does not mean I wish, it means miracle. And it's a miracle that these kids are longing for. They think that the magical energy released at the time that the two trains pass will be a kind of miracle, and that this is what will enable them to fulfill their deepest wishes. It turns out that their deepest wishes are not quite as predictable as perhaps they start out thinking. And that, in a way, is the real story of the film. But what I'd like to suggest is that wish for a miracle is actually very similar to the notion of the afterlife that comes up in Afterlife, the fact that there's some kind of way station where people's most piercing memory is rather tackily recreated for them so that they have something to accompany them into the real afterlife. Or Distance, where the characters have to come to terms with the atrocity committed by their late relatives and find some kind of meaning by visiting the lodge where the cult was based and looking out at the lake adjacent to it. Or Maboroshi, the first feature, in which a young widow has to come to terms with the death of her partner and its effects on her and her child. Told in, again, very distant terms, it's not an accident that his third film is called Distance, because Kore-eda was very cool, very detached, very considered, as I said, very controlling in terms of his aesthetic effects at the outset. I Wish is much more messy and much more engaged with people than perhaps those early films were, but its recourse to this idea that magic can play a part in human lives is not so different from the idea that appeared in those early films. It's really the last time that it does in Kore-eda. The other films are more squarely soap opera-ish in that they're more squarely focused on what happens in everyday lives when people fall out, or when people fail to meet each other's expectations, or when people have their hopes and expectations dashed. So the nearest we get to it in the more recent work is in a film like After the Storm, where the storm is supposed to have some kind of magical or cleansing properties, but it doesn't have the same weight, I think, in the narrative structure of the film as you get in this business of the two Shinkansen trains passing. That is much closer, I think, to the magical ideas that pop up in the early features of Kore-eda. So in a way, this film is the last gasp of the original Kore-eda, the Kore-eda that wanted to present in a rather intellectual way, not in any way an inhumane way, but at the same time a somewhat detached way, a somewhat keeping a distance, observing from a distance the problems that people put themselves through, the problems that people experience. Here we have it carried to its highest point, I would suggest. So for me, I Wish is the last really good Kore-eda film. I hope he can recapture this at some point in the future, but the most recent films I've seen have been a little disappointing.